They say the mountains have eyes, and the Appalachian peaks, they've seen things. Things that claw at the edges of sanity, whispers that promise madness, and presences that stalk the lonely trails. Tonight, we plunge into 3 true horror stories from the Appalachian Mountains. These aren't campfire legends, but chilling encounters that left ordinary people forever haunted by what lurks beneath the ancient trees. Prepare yourself, because in these hills, when the sun goes down, the real terror begins.
The year was 2010, and a seasoned solo hiker named Ethan set out to conquer a particularly remote section of the Appalachian Trail near Watauga Lake, Tennessee. Ethan was no stranger to solitude. In fact, he thrived on it. His treks were meticulous, every piece of gear weighed, every mile planned, every emergency protocol memorized. He sought the profound quiet of the wilderness, a stark contrast to his demanding city life. For the first 4 days, the trail was everything he'd hoped for: breathtaking vistas, challenging ascents, and nights spent under a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed within reach. He felt an almost spiritual connection to the ancient forest, a sense of peace that only deep nature could provide. On the 5th day, however, a subtle shift occurred. It began with the whispers. At first, he dismissed them as the wind rustling through the leaves, or perhaps his own mind playing tricks in the profound silence. But as the day wore on, the whispers grew distinct, a low, guttural murmur that seemed to follow him, just out of earshot. He would stop, turn, and listen, but the moment he focused, the sound would dissipate, only to resume once he started moving again. A prickle of unease, unfamiliar to him in the wilderness, began to crawl up his spine. That evening, as dusk bled into night, Ethan made camp beside a small, trickling creek. He built a fire, its flames a flickering comfort against the encroaching darkness. The whispers intensified, no longer indistinct, but seemingly closer, weaving through the trees just beyond the firelight. He strained to make out words, but they remained just beyond comprehension, like a forgotten language spoken by unseen entities. A cold dread seeped into his bones. He reminded himself of logical explanations: nocturnal animals, an unusual wind pattern, fatigue. But deep down, he knew this was different. He pulled out his satellite phone, a last resort for emergencies, and checked its signal. Nothing. He was truly alone. Throughout the night, the whispers escalated into a low, mocking chatter. It wasn't human. It was something else. A chorus of distorted, whispering voices that seemed to encircle his tent. He clutched his multi-tool, his only defense, and lay rigid, every muscle tense as hours crawled by. He heard movement, faint rustling in the leaves just outside his tent. He imagined shadowy figures circling, their unseen eyes fixed on him. At one point, a distinct, dragging sound scraped against the side of his tent, as if something heavy and rough was being pulled along the fabric. He froze, barely breathing, his heart hammering against his ribs. He wanted to scream, to bolt, but an instinct deeper than fear kept him paralyzed. He knew if he made a sound, if he revealed himself, whatever was out there would know exactly where he was. As the first sliver of dawn pierced the tree line, the sounds receded, fading back into the depths of the forest. When full daylight finally arrived, painting the woods in hues of green and gold, Ethan scrabbled out of his tent. He found no footprints, no broken branches, no trace of what had tormented him. Yet etched into the dirt beside his tent were 3 deep, parallel gouges, as if something with long, sharp claws had dragged itself along the ground. He packed his camp in a frenzy, abandoning his planned route and practically running the 15 miles to the nearest road. He flagged down the first car he saw, an old pickup driven by a local, and without a word, he collapsed into the passenger seat, shaking uncontrollably. To this day, Ethan never speaks of those whispers, but the silent terror in his eyes tells anyone who asks that he encountered something far older and more sinister than mere wind in the woods of Watauga. He never set foot on a solo hike again.
Deep within a secluded valley in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, surrounded by dense ancient woods, stood the remote cabin of the Miller family. David and Sarah Miller, along with their two young children, Emily and Josh, cherished their quiet life away from the bustle of civilization. Their cabin, a rustic but sturdy structure, was a sanctuary, and they had rarely, if ever, felt unsafe in their isolated haven. Their nearest neighbors were miles away, and the occasional curious deer or foraging bear were their usual visitors. It was a cold, late autumn evening. A fierce storm had rolled in, lashing rain against the windows and howling through the tall pines. The power had flickered out hours ago, plunging the cabin into a comforting darkness, lit only by the warm glow of the fireplace. The family was gathered around it, telling stories and playing board games, the sound of the wind and rain a natural lullaby. As the night progressed, a new sound began to filter through the storm's cacophony, a faint scratching coming from somewhere outside. David, a practical man, assumed it was a branch rubbing against the house, or perhaps a raccoon seeking shelter. He made a mental note to check it in the morning. However, the scratching didn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, moving from one side of the cabin to another. It evolved into a rhythmic tapping, then a thumping, as if something heavy was being dragged along the wooden exterior walls. Sarah, unnerved, suggested it might be a larger animal, perhaps a bear. David, though growing uneasy, tried to reassure her. He grabbed his hunting rifle, more for peace of mind than actual expectation of danger, and peered out a window, but the driving rain and pitch blackness offered no visibility. Then came the sound of the front porch swing creaking, slowly, rhythmically, back and forth, as if someone had just sat down. The wind was too strong for it to be merely the elements. A cold, palpable fear gripped the family. David crept to the front door, rifle at the ready, and listened. The creaking stopped. Silence save for the storm. He decided to wait. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Just as he was about to retreat, a loud, deliberate knock echoed through the silence of the storm. Not a timid knock, but a heavy, resonant thud against the sturdy oak door. David gripped the rifle tightly. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice betraying a slight tremor. No answer, only the roar of the wind. Then the doorknob began to turn. Slowly, audibly, the latch clicked as it tried to give way. The Millers had locked their doors, as always, but the sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was trying to get in. Sarah whimpered, pulling the children closer. David pressed his shoulder against the door, feeling the subtle give and resistance as the knob twisted. He heard a low, raspy growl from the other side, a sound that was not animal, not human, but something terrifyingly in between. The attack lasted for what felt like hours. The unseen entity outside relentlessly tested every window, every door, every weak point of the cabin. There were guttural snarls, heavy thuds against the walls, and at one point a chilling scraping sound as if something was attempting to pry it open the wooden shutters on a bedroom window. Emily, the youngest, started sobbing uncontrollably, burying her face in Sarah's shoulder. Josh, older, just stared wide-eyed at the door, his small hand clutched in his father's.
The Millers huddled together by the dying embers of the fire, the rifle useless against an unseen foe, praying for dawn. Finally, as the first gray light seeped through the clouds, the sound ceased. The unnatural presence vanished as abruptly as it had arrived. David cautiously approached the front door, pulling it open. The porch swing hung motionless, but on the wooden floorboards, clearly visible despite the rain, were deep, unsettling claw marks unlike anything he'd ever seen left by a bear or any known animal. And near the window where the scraping had been heard, long, dark strands of coarse black hair were snagged on a splintered piece of wood. The Millers left the cabin that very morning, never to return. Forever haunted by the night their peaceful mountain sanctuary became a siege, and they faced an uninvited guest they could neither see nor comprehend.
Park Ranger Thomas Olson had patrolled the vast, rugged expanses of Elk Ridge, West Virginia, for over 20 years. He knew its trails, its wildlife, its hidden springs, and its ancient secrets better than anyone. He was a man of logic and practicality, accustomed to the raw, untamed beauty of the wilderness, but never prone to fanciful notions or superstitions. That was until the summer of 2008, when he encountered something that challenged every fiber of his rational being. It began with a series of missing hikers. Not unusual in such a vast park, but the pattern was disturbing. They were experienced individuals, well-equipped, and disappeared without a trace. No abandoned camps, no distress signals, just vanishing acts. The local authorities, after extensive but fruitless searches, attributed them to unfortunate accidents or people simply getting lost. Thomas, however, felt a growing sense of unease. The disappearances were all concentrated in a particular, rarely visited section of the ridge, a densely forested area known locally as the Quiet Hollow, due to its unnerving lack of ambient noise. One sweltering July afternoon, while conducting a routine patrol through the Quiet Hollow, Thomas noticed an absolute, profound silence. Even for that area, it was unusual. No birdsong, no rustle of leaves, no buzzing insects. It was as if the forest itself was holding its breath. He paused, his senses heightened, the hair on his arms prickling. He had experienced natural quiet before, but this was different, an oppressive, unnatural stillness that seemed to swallow all sound. As he continued walking, the silence deepened, becoming almost tangible. His own footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, echoing in the void. Then he saw it. Up ahead, partially obscured by thick undergrowth, was a makeshift shelter, crudely constructed from branches and debris. It looked abandoned, yet an instinct screamed at him to approach with caution. As he drew closer, a faint, sickly sweet odor, like decaying meat mixed with something metallic, hung in the air. He pushed aside a curtain of tangled vines and peered inside. The shelter was empty, but on the ground, laid out in a disturbing pattern, were several small carved wooden effigies. They were crude, humanoid figures, their faces distorted into silent screams, adorned with what looked like dried berries and small shiny stones. More unsettling still, in the center of the arrangement was a single, freshly plucked raven's feather, lying on a patch of disturbed earth. Thomas felt a wave of nausea, not just from the smell, but from the chilling implication of what he was seeing. This wasn't the work of a lost hiker or a casual camper. This was deliberate, ritualistic. He backed away slowly, his hand instinctively going to the sidearm on his hip, though he knew it would be useless against whatever had created this. As he retreated, he heard a sound, a single sharp snap of a twig behind him. He spun around, rifle raised, but saw nothing. Only the unchanging, oppressive silence. He scanned the dense trees, his heart pounding, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. He had the distinct, horrifying sensation of being watched, not by an animal, but by something intelligent and patient, hidden within the impenetrable green. He made his way out of the quiet hollow as quickly as he dared, never once breaking eye contact with the surrounding forest. When he finally reached his patrol vehicle, he didn't stop until he was far away, the unnerving silence and sickly scent fading with distance. He reported his findings to his superiors, but without concrete evidence of foul play. The wooden effigies and raven's feather were dismissed as eccentric remnants of a survivalist or a local oddity. Thomas, however, knew better. The profound silence, the chilling sense of observation, the deliberate artistry of those figures. It spoke of something ancient, something that hunted in the stillness of Elk Ridge. He continued his patrols, but never again entered the quiet hollow alone. And whenever the wind died down and an unnatural silence fell over the mountains, he knew, deep in his bones, that something was still out there, waiting in the absolute stillness.